Advent 1, and we are beginning a new church year in our lectionary. And yet, today's story will sound very familiar to those who were here a few weeks ago. Because of the way lectionary works, we are still dwelling on the apocalyptic themes. So Jesus and his disciples are still in the temple courtyard. Not the Mount of Olives across. But today's story is told from the perspective of Luke instead of Mark, given that we are now beginning a new church year. There are some people in the temple who were talking about how it was decorated with beautiful stones and ornaments dedicated to God. And Jesus said to them, "As for the things you are admiring, the time is coming when not even one stone will be left upon another. All will be demolished." And the people asked him, "Teacher, when will these things happen? What sign will show that these things are about to pass?" And Jesus taught the crowd, saying that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On earth there will be dismay among nations in their confusion over the roaring of the sea and the surging waves. The planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. And then they will see the human one coming on a cloud with power and great splendor. And when these things begin to happen, stand up straight and raise your heads, because your redemption is near. And Jesus kept on teaching. And he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that God's kingdom is near. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until everything has happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. And he warned them, saying, "Take care that your hearts aren't dulled by drinking parties, drunkenness, and the anxieties of day-to-day life. Don't let that day fall upon you unexpectedly like a trap. It will come upon everyone who lives on the face of the whole earth. Stay alert at all times, praying that you are strong enough to escape everything that is about to happen and to stand before the human one. And every day, Jesus was teaching in the temple, but he spent each night on the Mount of Olives. So now I invite you to wander along with me about today's story. A few weeks ago, in Mark's telling of the story, it was Jesus' disciples who stopped him on his way to the Mount of Olives to marvel at the buildings of Jerusalem. In Luke's telling today, Jesus goes up to a crowd of people talking amongst themselves in the temple courtyard. I wonder which of these tellings sounds more like Jesus to you.
There are a lot of stories where he's in the temple and, doing his thing in defiance of the authorities. But certainly there's a lot of stories where he's off in the fields by himself too. So it's hard to say. They both do.
Sure. So you can see the resonance of him sort of perhaps picking battles
Yes.
in the temple, getting into theological argumentation, but also times when he and his disciples went away to their own private space, and there was a lot of emphasis on the privacy of that teaching when we did Mark's story a few weeks ago.
He talks about how everything's going to crumble, and then he goes over to the olives, which makes me think he's trying to say that life maybe won't crumble, but buildings are not as important, so stop marveling over buildings.
Fascinating. Yeah, so you're picking up on the duality here of the Mount of Olives, a green living place, whereas this is more, physically green, more urban city-like buildings all around, and the temple especially is the pinnacle of buildings for Jews of his time, and these these human-made things will crumble, yeah. Jesus talks about the tumultuous and chaotic return of the human one. Another translation reads, the Son of Man. I wonder what this name means to you.
What was the term used
In this translation, we use the human one.
Human one, thank you.
Well, it was revolutionary to think that a deity would become human, and I think that's sort of what set this story of Christ and story of
Yeah.
Simplify lots of
By,
ideologies.
so this title, the human one, the Son of Man, however we translate it, emphasizes this very important point in Christian theology of God becoming human, and through that blessing, redeeming, saving all of us. Yeah. I wonder what it means when Jesus says that we should stand up straight and raise our heads because our redemption is near.
I think he's telling people, don't be afraid.
And maybe be proud of yourself as well.
Did you have more you wanted to say?
Well, he is telling people, don't be afraid of when it comes. This is his, sign of, if this, when this happens, you'll know that it's, when he said the thing with the figs.
Yeah, so don't be afraid, but read the signs, know what is coming, and perhaps there's have pride in yourself. You want to say more about that?
Don't ruin your life thinking that the end is near, so go crazy.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah. See. So you're saying see the value in who you are and what you're doing, and don't think that the end changes all of that.
Yeah,
Basically.
it doesn't know everything.
He
Sure,
didn't
yeah.
actually say it was the end. He just said that this happened.
Sure. Yeah. So the coming of the human one, the Son of Man, whether it's the end or not, it's end of an era, perhaps, and beginning of a new era. Any other thoughts?
Well, I wonder if it's also a encouragement to pay attention to the world around you. And I feel like the older I get, the more I realize how important it is to listen to other people, to listen to what they have to say, and to just pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah. So pay attention to what's going on, and you'll be able to read these signs and understand.
As a man getting very old, I realize with absolute certainty that the end for me is not far away. And I think the older, I know the older we get, the more it's not something that is a fiction. It is coming. So how does one prepare one's soul for it?
Sure. Yeah, so having the humility and the wisdom to read the signs, saying how and respond to them accordingly in a very personal way. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, and obviously, we all realize we're living in an extremely turbulent time. So are we to ascertain that these are signs of the end coming, or is it just another series of events in a long cycle of humanity? That's the riddle.
Sure.
You touched on this when I was outside packing a lung out. But I'm fascinated by the use of the word redemption. He talks about all these things that are going to happen, signs, the ocean rising and temple falling, and then calls that redemption. And that's not the use of the word that really resonates with me initially. These these are scary portents that he puts forth. And then he uses that word of redeeming, which I would natively think of as something positive coming. And so there's some creative tension there that I don't know what to do with in the story.
I never said it was going to be a bad thing.
No, he never said it was a bad thing. The signs that I recall hearing him mentioning was, the temple falling down, waves rising.
Surging waves.
Yeah, surging waves.
Scary things.
Yeah, those are scary things that, I would see them as scary. And then aligning that with the word redemption is just, I don't know, it's a little confusing for me.
It is, it creates cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Because there's, it's talking about seeing things that our instincts tell us are scary and bad.
Yeah.
But he's saying that this is the beginning of something really good.
Yeah.
Perhaps related to that, my next question was about, this is a perfect intro. So it's the sprouting of the fig leaves means that summer is near. So if the kingdom of God is likened to summer, and the season before that, before the sprouting, would be winter, that means that we are now living in a time of winter, and that the kingdom of God will be a time of summer. I wonder what that way of understanding this means to you.
It means like some things are going to be like cold and bitter winter, and then like just know that the summer and the sunshine is coming.
Mm-hmm. So there might be a coldness, a bitterness to the present moment that will not be there. Were you in?
Oh, no.
No, okay.
Lots of cultures celebrate light this time of year. We've got Hanukkah, Diwali, our Advent candles, and our Advent wreath has light in it. Winter solstice celebrations often it's all about light. I think because we are in darkness if you live far away from the equator, you're in darkness for the majority of the time during the winter. And summer is a time of growth, yes, but also light. It's when it gets dark at 4:30, there's a feeling, a heaviness to that, I think, that isn't present when it's dark at 9:30. So I guess that's a layer I'm thinking about with this idea of being in the winter versus being in the summer. There's a darkness that kind of weighs heavy on us, keeps us inside, keeps us needing artificial light, cold and bitter, like Hannah was talking about too. Feels a little oppressive, I suppose.
Yeah, so it feels a bit oppressive. We are creatures who are drawn to light, and so we feel more constrained when there's a lot of darkness. Yeah.
So in this darkness, do we celebrate the light because we have survived and there is still light?
There's hope.
Okay. So we celebrate the hope of light?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is light. Winter's not that for most places. Some places are dark all the time. But where most people live, there is some light throughout the day, just not as much. But the hope of the summer, when the light is more abundant, is always there. But then I guess when you're in summer, winter will eventually come too. So maybe that's not a good analogy.
Yes, well, I think one would probably read this to understanding that the coming of in the summer of the kingdom of God would not be a temporary summer, and so this would be, I don't know, but there is definitely that emphasis of when we don't have as much light, then we celebrate the light we do have more. some cases, summer is an abundance of light, an abundance of many things, of good food, of harvest, of all these different things that we feel the scarcity of right now in winter. I wonder what it means to you that Jesus says, take care that your hearts aren't dulled by drinking parties, drunkenness, and the anxieties of day-to-day life. In other words, that the opposite of letting our hearts be dulled is what he calls us to do, is to stay alert at all times.
I was surprised to hear both drunkenness and the anxieties of everyday life lumped together. That surprised me a little bit. It challenges me to wonder about the anxieties of day-to-day life. Are they dulling in some way? I had never thought of that. I can see the drunkenness part of it. That's pretty obvious to me. But the anxiety part, not as obvious to me.
Well, I hadn't thought of this before, but it calls to mind, I think, going back to, I believe Aristotle talked about virtue being the middle way between two polar extremes. And so perhaps drunkenness is carrying too little, and anxieties is carrying too much. But in the middle, there's the ability to be alert, not just to the present moment, but what's beyond.
It just, for me, it recalls, Jesus is saying, sufficient to the day the troubles thereof, and not, we can let anxiety take hold of our lives in a way that is not helpful. I think it's, for me, it's always walking a balance between being aware and alert and saying, yes, I'm concerned about this, and not getting overly obsessed about things.
Yeah, when
And
you care too
realizing-
much, you can't see the bigger picture.
Yes, and you can't, it's harder to pay attention to the ordinary things that make life work, making sure there's food on the table and that you talk to your kids, or you spend time with your husband, or you get the bed made in the morning. There's little things that give an order and a flow to life are important to pay attention to. If you get too anxious, at least for me, I find, then they start to fall apart, and it's
Sure.
not that helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So even the daily ordinary things can start to fall apart if you're too anxious about the daily ordinary things.
And yet, that's so much the substance of life. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that, part of what he's saying, raising your head high, is don't let this news frighten you and take up all of your time until it happens. Just, enjoy the time before.
Yeah, to stay in the present moment as you're aware of this other thing. Don't lose sight of that other thing, but perhaps don't let it take you away from the present moment. I wonder where the good news is for you in today's story as we wrap up.
I think it's what everyone's been saying. But it seems like since you all put it all together, but that Jesus is offering this way of what helps you stay in the middle. My experience is, hope is one thing. But hope, you may feel cold and may feel like there are signs of awful things happening,
wonder, to staying alert to the goodness and the joy.
Yeah, it's right there.
I find impermanence soothing. You know, hearing, look, yeah, you know, if I was an old person in that day and age, probably struggling to keep my roof from leaking, just like if you're a homeowner now, you probably struggle to keep your roof from leaking.
Especially in
And,
Pacifica.
yeah, and knowing that the temple is going to fall. And it's a good reminder that all things are going to go. And knowing that the temple is going to fall is a very good reminder to, you know, focus on that. Because all things are going to go. I personally find that to be a
So
reassuring concept.
impermanence can help us focus on the present moment.
Yes.
I'm thinking about what you said, Matt, about how all of the signs are super scary, and then we hear redemption, or the translation here is liberation, or liberation is near. So the idea that these scary things are actually the way that we are delivered, that is very hopeful and good news to me.
So that there's hope in the scariness.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like a lot of the plants can't create new life and fruit without that sort of death and rebirth, right? Like during the winter. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So the winter is what allows the new life to come back,
Yeah.
and the scary things are what allow us to have hope. Well, thank you.
Forests that need fire
Yes.
in order for the pine cone to open so that the seeds
Yes.
can regenerate.
Yes.
So they have to go through this scary thing in order to
Yeah,
actually.
or
As we know here in California, fire is a natural part.
Be burned out.
Yeah.
And the scarier things are, the more you have to be conscious about being alert to good things around you.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So the scarier it gets, the more important it is to be alert and
Right.
be able to point out and notice the joy, the beauty, the new life. Yeah.
Yes. I'm good with that.
Well, thank you all for wandering along with me about today's story.